A sequel essay? It's weird. If you're a young American filmmaker, have you noticed lately that people you know tend to use Hollywood material as a kind of measuring stick of quality for your work? The word professional might be thrown around, which is to say they witness something you've made and, depending on how close it is to something they've seen mainstream Hollywood produce, they'll immediately compare the two. Therefore, Hollywood becomes synonymous with professional, which is not always the case. This is not their fault. A lot of this stems from the same ideas I mentioned in my first essay video about inherent filmmaking. We learn from what's around us at any given time, and if you're a filmmaker, you probably started by subconsciously learning from the movies or TV shows or cartoons you were exposed to at the time. Why else would you have been inspired to make movies in the first place if you do? The problem becomes what is naturally inherent, with things I mentioned in my last video, like balance, the use of space, time, and even color, and what isn't naturally inherent, but is inherent to us culturally. In my previous inherent filmmaking essay, I used my earliest public works from 2009 to show what movies were teaching me. And a lot of what they taught me was very basic, formal, and technical things, because I wasn't exactly ready to understand what else they could be teaching me. But today, I wanted to look at some of the stuff I made after that, in 2010 and onward, to give you an idea of where my head was at and why I was so focused on what I was. 2010 was when I started to finally try and make my work feel more cinematic, or professional. I wanted to take the next step because, despite the fact that I had picked up on some visual ideas from my 2009 work, a lot of that stuff was primarily concept-driven. There were no narratives, and there was hardly any dialogue, and when words were spoken, it was pretty obnoxiously minimal. So the next step naturally felt like it needed to be more like a narrative, even a little. What was the conflict? What do I do about it in the story? Narratives are obviously inherent, but a lot of the ways I tackled things like humor and other sorts of story beats and editing ideas I got from other material. In a way, a lot of my stuff was unintentional homage because I thought this is what it meant to tell a story, or to be funny, or to convey an idea, since I didn't have much practice at that before. My big start to all of this was my Elm Street fan film, which I mentioned briefly in my last essay was the first project I figured out the concept of intercutting between scenes.
He's horribly burnt, and on his hand, he wears a...
Yeah, you remember that. I would rather not show the whole clip again. So in 2011, I started showing more and more of what I was learning from just working on stuff, and self-teaching a little bit of form to myself. This peaked with my attempt at a feature film, Timeless Heroes, which one day I will go very, very deep into, but all that's important to know now is that it taught me a lot of essential stuff. Working with a large amount of people, planning out production specifics, the importance of music and when it was played, and just organization generally. Everything in that film was also a reaction to what I saw in film, from punchy and over-the-top humor, to cartoonish physics, to very uncomfortably religious overtones, and so on. From there, the development started to seem more and more clear. In 2012, I was being exposed to slightly darker stuff, and was getting even more into horror, so I was trying to create darker stuff. 2013 was more about quantity than quality, and 2014 was when I started film school, so that was reflective in what I was doing at the time. I wrote shot lists and drew storyboards, and from there the progression was more dictated by both what I learned from film school and what I knew film school couldn't really teach me. What I'm trying to say is, unless we are professionally trained from the start, a lot of what we're doing is inherent to the culture we're in. Hollywood shaped a lot of what I thought dramatic storytelling was, and since I didn't have a frame of reference for what good and bad stories are individually, all of it just read as storytelling to me. That's why a lot of my work varied in tone and quality. I was just doing different things all the time. I would even say I might have come full circle with my newest stuff, which focuses more on what the movie is than what the story is. Strangely enough, the way that I made my films wasn't actually the weirdest thing that I took from Hollywood. That would be how I marketed it. Believe me, I know how important this is to you. And we also know how difficult this is. Just trust me that once this deal is made, he won't bother you anymore.
We'll make sure of it.
Now, I didn't need to market anything. at least for a couple of years with my early stuff. My viewer base was less than 100 people for a long time, and even after long enough it was still less than 1,000 until very recently. So the fact that I made trailers for even my earliest stuff, and made posters and personal DVDs that mimic DVDs of American distributed works, was pretty odd. Like, who was this for? Well, me, because I figured that the marketing was an inherent part of filmmaking. You gotta have a trailer, you gotta have DVDs and posters. That's how you do it. It's made more sense in the past 2 or 3 years because my audience has actually been growing now, so when I made trailers for things like Stan Frederick, a Mortars episode, stuff like that, it was justified because I had someone to market my work to. But before that, there was no reason for it. I saw something meant for consumers as an integral part of creating that product that wasn't even a product. And the thing that I find kind of neat about this is that before advertising was this integral, there were kid filmmakers like me that thought that it was already. I might be making a teaser trailer for Timeless Heroes this month. The film itself, haven't really gotten much progress done on it. I have to admit, there has not been much work put into it at the moment. I think it might reach a point where what we consider to be inherent filmmaking is completely resigned to culture. More people are consuming these stories than ever before, and I think that it's important to understand the difference between what is naturally inherent, as in what we as humans see in the picture and sound parts of filmmaking, and what is culturally popular. Now, both are valuable, let me be clear about that. We're still able to see what filmmakers find important within the culture and how essential it is to them that it reaches people. At the end of the day, that's what's worth the creation of even some of the worst movies out there. What on earth was going through this person's mind when they made this? It's easy to blame a studio, but some ideas are just other people's. We all learn habits and trends from other places, whether we want to admit it or not, and the value of knowing this can help us to remember to always inject at least a little bit of us into what we make. In my earliest years, I was making content that was meant to satisfy others because that's all I figured movies were: entertainment. If film school taught me anything valuable, it's that film could be more than that. Something thematic, something aesthetic, something technical, or just something that's a part of someone else. And I keep that in mind when I make stuff now. Plenty of filmmaking is inherent, but the most unique parts of filmmaking, perfect or not, need to come from you.